panel this morning. Unfortunately, as Ivan was saying, Peter Jones, unfortunately, couldn't make it. He sends his apologies. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Steve Wallage. I'm Managing Director of BroadGroup Consulting. So we've done over 30 commercial due diligence exercises in this market. I've worked with many of you in the data center market, but I'd like to let our panelists introduce themselves, just say a little bit about themselves and their company. So starting with Prashant.
Sure, thanks. Is this on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. So Prashant Murthy from Airtrunk, CFO of the business there. A little bit about Airtrunk. We're a hyperscale focused only business, regionally located in Asia Pacific. So started our roots about 3 years ago in Sydney and Melbourne, and then have over the course of the last 12 or so months expanded now into Singapore and Hong Kong, both of those sites opening up over the course of this year. In aggregate now about 340 megawatts of total IT load across all of our sites. Typically very large campus builds with a further fifth site that we've just acquired late last year in Sydney as well, and further expansion plans really in the broad region. But
Okay.
a little bit about us.
And well, Prashant, you've probably been a little bit modest there. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your recent funding. I think probably many people in the room, they know every seller in the data center industry is now saying, I want an Airtrunk-like valuation. So maybe just a little bit about that, Prashant.
Right. Probably can't say too much, but look, as a business now, we've deployed about $1.5 billion of capital over the course of the last 3 years. It's Aussie dollars, a bit less in US, but we, over the course of that time, we've really accessed a lot of great pools of capital. Natixis and ING were early investors alongside Goldman's and TPG, and more recently, a fair amount of press speculation that we'll have new major shareholders as well in the form of Macquarie, which actually I was 11 years Macquarie before Airtrunk, so should be a good outcome. But look, at the end of the day, it's the business has been growing phenomenally well. We've basically since inception have probably grown about 5x since when we kicked off the business, and successfully deploying into new markets, and really with I'm sure all the panelists will agree, it's a very customer-centric business model focusing on hyperscale. So we've kept that mentality and reaped the rewards over the last few years.
Thank you. And Frederic.
My name is Frederic Moeller. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Safehost. I've been in position since 2006. We are a Swiss data center company. We have 4 data centers with roughly 75 megawatts to site. By the end of this year, we'll have deployed 30 of that, which roughly 26 will be revenue generating. We had a new equity partner join us last year, who has given us considerably deeper pockets to go out in the market now and to expand. And we look forward to leveraging our position as a Swiss player.
Thank you. And Cathrine.
Thank you. Cathrine Telje, I'm the CFO of Digiplex. And Digiplex is the only pan-Nordic data center provider. We've been in the business for 20 years, based out of Oslo. And we have now 5 data centers, expanding to 7, but a smaller kind of size than Airtrunk here. We are backed by 2 gentlemen from the US, privately owned, so we have a solid capital base. And we also have been in the market securing funding, so we went to the bond market and saw really attractive both rates and interest there. So we have a strong capital base for the growth going forward, and we also see the hyperscale wave, as you describe it, and it's really interesting also for the Nordics.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few questions of my own to ask the panel, but I will open the floor to questions. So if anyone's got anything they'd like to ask the group, then please do let me know. Put your hand up, we'll pass the microphone round. So first off, in terms of the panel, we're talking about funding and what you look for. So starting with perhaps yourself, Prashant, I mean, when you look at a new proposition, a new market, a new data center build, what are the key things you look for in terms of whether that business looks to tick the right boxes?
Sure. Look, I think first and foremost for us as the mentality we have as a business is, again, a very customer-centric focus. So a lot of the investments ultimately, when starting off, are somewhat, call it strategic in nature. You know, we've typically always launched into a facility or a new market with an anchor tenant. But at the end of the day, taking a very financially prudent approach to that. So, you know, we'll always assess every opportunity on a return on capital basis, on an IRR basis, to ensure that we're actually meeting both returns not only of that opportunity that we sit today, but also the you know, looking forward. You know, you clearly don't launch a 100 megawatt campus and expect to fill it straight away. So how will that sort of pan out over the course of its over full utilisation? So we sort of look at it very much on what does that opportunity deliver. Are we servicing an important customer for our greater platform? What do we see as sort of the pipeline of opportunities beyond that? And ultimately, is this something that we can fund?
And I don't know if you're able to share this with the audience, but what sort of IRR, return on capital, would you be looking for?
We definitely don't share that.
Okay. I tried. No one will tell anyone outside this room. So and Frederic, the same question.
Well, we're definitely customer driven. We were sort of ahead of the curve here in Switzerland by building a hyperscale centre in Gland in the Canton of Vaud. And we've been following that customer and some other customers now, wherever they want to go, and we're flexible and agile in that regard, and that's something that we'd like to keep focused on.
Absolutely. And Cathrine?
Yes, we also we had an anchor customer when we built 2 previous data centers, but we see now that it's time in order to reduce time to market for our customers, we need to start investing earlier on. So we need to look at the right land, get the power secured, and do some kind of base investment to be ready to go and deploy this the standard solution when the customer is there. Of course, it's from a base of customer, and we know them, but I think you can't sit and wait to have the contract signed. It's very nice to have it when you go for the funding, but now you have to be also able to have some equity which is willing to invest in front.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's a very relevant point. For us, in launching Singapore was a 2+ year investment of time to be at the point to pull the trigger, and Hong Kong was 1.5 years, and we've been in Japan for a similar period of time as well in assessing that market and other markets in our region. So it's not it's a long investment process, well ahead of actually investing dollars, or at least hard dollars.
No, absolutely. And Cathrine, starting this time with you, if I may, you talked in the introduction about debt funding. Maybe perhaps you could talk a little bit more about how you see the debt markets for data centers.
Yeah, we believe it's a strong market for data centers, at least when you have the customers there. But you have to invest equity up till you have the signed contracts and you have a good business case. So what we did for our last bond was to put together 3 data centers in one portfolio, and all of them 100% occupied, and of course brought a big interest in the market. So the bond was largely oversubscribed, and we got to the lower level of the margin band. And we also see that there's a lot of interest also from other parts of the markets. We're now tapping into investment grade money for the next build with even lower margins. So there's capital there, but of course to have the equity backing is really important as a base. Yeah.
And you mentioned to me earlier about getting a green bond, sustainability funding.
Yeah. So that's the next big thing, I think. You see it in the US. Some of the data centers there have already gotten green certifications and issued green bonds. And we see in the Nordic market now that those that can issue green certified bond get higher interest, and there are larger pockets of money, and you also get then slimmer margins. So, and it's possible. And as an industry, I also think we need to think more green also on the equity side. We saw Hyperscale, which is a large Norwegian oil service private equity company. They tried to sell 12 oil services companies just now, and there was no interest. And that's probably because they don't see that non-sustainable companies will grow as much as sustainable companies. And I think as an industry, we have a huge job to do there, to look for the renewable energy, to look for heat reuse and other energy efficient methods going forward to attract capital. Because capital is going where they see the growth, and if you're not sustainable, you won't be able to grow as much as the other ones.
Interesting. And Frederic, you seeing some of those same trends?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously got new equity partners. We're back in the debt markets now, looking specifically at sort of construction-related financings. On the sustainability side, I think Switzerland may be a bit behind the curve. Hopefully, we'll catch up quickly. As a company, we've been sustainably focused since our inception. We've had 100% hydroelectric power usage from 2003. And so we've been very focused across every single aspect of our business in sustainability. So hopefully we can work along with Digiplex at that sort of establishing a market here in Europe for this sort of thing.
And Prashant, with your recent funding, how important were the questions around environmental sustainability?
No, we definitely see a lot of that actually, and it's a huge focus, as Frederic said and Cathrine said. Look, for our business, it's a huge focus as well. With a portion of our engineering teams specifically focused on sustainable energy sources, as well as sort of as a broader business, what we should be focused on there. You know, I think similar to maybe Switzerland, as Australia is sort of coming through the curve. Access to renewable energy is sort of being access is growing, let's say, but you know the way the network is set up there, the utilities are set up there, it's still very much a blend in terms of what's on the grid. So it's something that we're incredibly focused on. We know our customers, I think, very importantly as well, are very focused on it as well. And you know, we recently deployed an embedded energy network solution across our sites where customers can procure directly renewable power sources as well, so that they're able to do their own PPAs as need be. So we're sort of trying to make it as easy as possible to provide access. At the end of the day, like the challenge in a business like ours is, and in the markets that we operate in, is access to such power.
Absolutely, and we've seen, of course, Singapore effectively put an embargo on new data centre builds, you know, somewhat similar to the city of Amsterdam. I mean, is that something you're seeing in Asia, a lot of countries being concerned about the power usage from data centres?
Look, I think in small geographic locations like Singapore, and sort of generation is a bit of a challenge ultimately. I think you might see in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's not the easiest market to get access to power as well, and you know, with the way that sort of power is managed in that market. I think that's in the near term, the smaller geographies and generation's challenging will be a challenge. But I think overall, I think in every market globally, you know, data centers are huge consumers of energy. You know, one of our facilities in Sydney could power a small city in our broader state. It's quite phenomenal when you think about the trajectory of where this sector's going. I think generation in any market's going to be a problem. So Amsterdam and Singapore are probably just front-running what other markets are going to see in the future.
Absolutely. And we touched earlier on business model issues, maybe starting with yourself, Cathrine. If maybe we can jump on to talk about the hyperscalers as clients. Of course, we know in many ways they're wonderful clients, take lots of space, but equally, of course, very demanding clients and very competitive to win their business. I mean, for Digiplex as a business, how do you see the hyperscaler opportunity?
Well, we come from kind of a long colocation retail background, so bringing that experience into the hyperscaler delivery was very important for us, because we kind of had the competence in-house to start working for the hyperscalers. But of course, it's lifting the bar quite a lot. So from everything from the design to the building to securing kind of the right delivery times to the operations itself, everything is we have to professionalize as a business to deliver to the hyperscalers, no doubt. But of course also it helps with those larger densities, which brings kind of the cost per square meter down, and also that they take a large chunk at a time. Helps funding kind of the professionalism of the company. Yeah.
And Frederic?
Yeah, we've also come from a retail background, and in our case, we've literally set up a separate sort of hyperscale team, site selection team, and we're working, sort of as a hybrid. Where we can, we sort of cross-functional departments, but we've had to sort of separate retail and hyperscale just because it's quite a different business for us.
And this is obviously a model that people like Equinix with xScale has followed. I mean, do you find any pushback from your customers, particularly as we know that the hyperscalers demand very low pricing? So some of your retail customers saying, "Ooh, I'd like to pay a little bit closer to those rates."
No, we do see some solutions where customers are now also doing a sort of hybrid solution, so they're keeping private cloud and infrastructure with us, but they're also moving literally to another data center of ours. So that's convenient, but we're not getting pricing pressure as such.
Okay. And Prashant, from your side, obviously very focused on the hyperscalers. I mean, did some of your potential investors have concerns about your dependence on one or two of those companies?
Look, it's an obvious question which can and should come up. At the end of the day, we've got, call it 6 customers today. We'll probably in the next 3 years probably not have more than 10. And I think that's a pretty realistic proposition. But the ultimate structure of our contracts, the way that we're the reason a lot of people are chasing hyperscale, not only the size but the long tenor nature, some of the features that actually make it look very much like an infrastructure contract that also makes it quite simpler to fund, means that people sort of get past those initial risks. So yeah, it's definitely a question that people will ask on. But what we've, and I know you asked the question earlier, like the evolution of funding markets, we've seen even in the last 2 to 3 years, like people's appetite and understanding of this subsector versus say retail specifically, versus say old world sort of telco colo rooms, like really old world rooms have definitely morphed into people sort of understanding differences in business models. So whether it's a financing or an equity led discussion, I think that's now a well-trodden path.
Okay. And one other question on this, maybe I'll start with yourself, Frederic. One of the questions we often get working for some of the investors is, the company's got a hyperscaler customer, and the hyperscaler has said to them, well, I'm only going to take a few megawatts today, but in the future I could take tens of megawatts, as I develop the business. How do you tend to see the expansion of the hyperscaler customers that you have, and how much extra space do you think they'll take over the next few years?
We're fortunate enough that we've already got enough supply on the Swiss market to really sort of take care, especially on the French-speaking side, of their requirements going forward. We do follow the sort of, we try to find a balancing act between, as you were saying earlier, being agile enough and sort of prescient enough to see what they want before they want it, and I think that's an important part of our strategy. Is really we don't want to take the risks. We have capital partners who are risk averse. At the same time, we have to be sort of managing as an operator the risks of developing ahead of what their requirements are.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cathrine?
No, we see actually, it's just the same as you do, and but we do expect quite a lot of expansion, because one mega trend now is the digitization of the world, and with AI and IoT and 5G and everything that the man from Brazil talked about, you see that also in all other areas of the world. And that will require expansion from all of the hyperscalers, actually, in some way or another. So you will have kind of local companies moving into the cloud, but the cloud has to stay somewhere, and usually close to the end customer as well. So we plan for expansion and expect expansion as well, and we do give kind of right of first refusals to these larger clients, so that we have some knowledge of where they expect to go at least.
Absolutely. Prashant?
Look, I think it's a similar phenomenon everywhere. We've had the good fortune of seeing our customers grow actually quite meaningfully across our facilities, from taking their anchor capacities and then ultimately growing into further space. At the end of the day, it's a huge investment on the customer side as well. Set up a network node at our facilities, to get fibre running to facilities as well. Deploying teams, etc. So like the expectation is ultimately that these guys do double, triple, quadruple what they've deployed, and we've seen that in some instances, and in others now we're seeing the benefit of also having a cross-Asia platform where they are looking for a single provider to sort of service their needs across multiple parts of those jurisdictions. And some of the major hyperscalers are starting to even sub-focus on particular vendors that they see as preferred to sort of work with, just to simplify that process of procurement. So it would.
Absolutely. That leads me actually to my next question, I see, so thank you, Prashant, is in terms of consolidation in the industry. As you mentioned, clearly if the hyperscalers want a limited number of partners, then that suggests a limited number will exist. And to be frank, of course, with Airtrunk, there's clearly suggestions in the marketplace that a trade buyer would effectively acquire Airtrunk. I mean, clearly, when investors look at the different businesses, they're looking very closely at what the exit strategy will be. And there's certainly a view that we're going to see a big three, big four players globally. Is this something you're expecting to see, Prashant, that we're going to see that increasing concentration of power?
Yeah, look, I don't see why it shouldn't be the case over time. Look, I think as you're looking in the pocket of the market that we're operating in, and probably the other sort of pocket of the world as well is probably Latin America, where there's still a lot of opportunity for the local players to grow very, very big. What happens to global consolidation will then be, I think, a function of how big each of the respective companies are. But I think right now, at least from our vantage point, there's a handful of players in the global players who have got presences in our markets. Digital Realty, Equinix, obviously, have long-standing presences in these markets. But when that turns into consolidation, I think a lot of the focus has probably been North America, Europe, for the last few years, and maybe for the next coming years. There's still a lot of wood to chop in those markets, and I think we're a couple of years away from seeing that type of consolidation. But that's just my view.
Interesting. And Frederic, obviously, some of the global players don't have a Swiss presence today.
No, I think most of them do now, right? No, consolidation is an inevitable part of a maturing business, but I think they have the big three now have 30% of the market or something like that. But we'll eventually see. Sort of, there'll still be some niche players. I think the Swiss market is very unique in a lot of. We're 26 different states, a federation. Every state has different rules and regulations, which makes it almost sort of 26 countries on its own. But we will, going back, we will see consolidation eventually.
Gosh, I never thought of Switzerland as 26 countries.
Yeah, I mean, we have data centers in 3 cantons now, and it's literally like every canton is a different state, different rules, different regulations, different languages. It's definitely unique, and that helps us, I guess, when we expand internationally, because we're used to dealing with these little intricacies of cultures and languages.
Yes, and Cathrine?
Yes, of course we do expect consolidation, and I think also especially for Europe and the Nordics as well, where there are many smaller players and many players who have still kind of in-house DCs, where you will see sell and lease back, you will see spinning off from kind of IT services companies spinning off their data center business and so on. So we do expect consolidation, and also, of course, the international players taking more part of the Nordics than they do today. So we are the only one who's present in or Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And we don't expect that to stay like that for a long time. No, we don't.
No, absolutely. Let me, I've got one more question I wanted to ask, but then please, if anyone's got any questions, please raise your hand and we can ask our panel. In terms of geography, in terms of starting perhaps with yourself, Prashant, I mean, you know, as you mentioned, a number of Asian markets you're already in today. I mean, how do you decide which the next market will be and what's likely to be the sort of market that you might enter next?
Sure. Look, it's actually very similar to what Cathrine said earlier. Like we've put our feelers out into a lot of new markets like Singapore, Hong Kong, were markets we've spent a lot of time in already prior to launching, and we've spent good amounts of time in other markets in the broader region. You know, and ultimately, it's very much a follow the customer mentality still, where there's definitely demand in markets like India, Indonesia, Korea, Japan, all markets we're not physically present, although we have some small staff presences actually in two of those markets. But in having facilities there, it's markets we continue to explore very, very deeply. Deploying engineering staff to do site selection, to do design work, to find access to power, so that when a customer is ready to go, ultimately we've typically driven the business model in that direction to date, and it's worked quite successfully.
Okay, interesting. So you look at the market first, and then when the hyperscaler says...
And we're working in conjunction with them the whole time. So, we'll spend an extensive amount of time speaking to them about, where they'd like to be, what is it that they're looking for, to ensure our site selection, our design work is sort of meeting ultimately the needs, so that we know when it's ready to go and we've got everything lined up together. But it's not wait for the customer and work it out later. That doesn't really that doesn't work so well.
Yes, absolutely. And Frederic, you said 23 more cantons to go in Switzerland, but is there other countries outside Switzerland that you would look at, and what would be the issues you would consider?
We can't really talk about it too much, but we are looking outside of Switzerland. Again, I mean, sort of the theme today, we're customer driven. We've been asked to look at different areas, and we're already sort of preparing ourselves for that eventuality, and we have a site selection team looking around at different opportunities.
Very concrete.
Can't say more than that.
Anyone who wants to talk to Frederic after the discussion, there's and Cathrine, you could talk more openly.
If you look from the customer perspective, I think we have to come back to the sustainable issue.
Yeah.
So I think the customers will look for areas where they can get renewable energy, where they can get the cool climate, so kind of more efficient cooling, and where you have kind of some way to get rid of the heat, so have some heat reuse. And in that respect, I think for a European perspective, the Nordics has a very good offer in terms of the cool climate and abundance of hydroelectric power as well, and also cheap power. So for us, the Nordics is kind of where we want to be and where we see the growth going forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Finland, for example, would be...
Finland would be of interest, yes.
Yes. Would upset any of our colleagues in the audience. Okay, as I mentioned, very happy to answer any questions from the audience. We have our microphone over there. Anyone would like to ask a quick question? Yeah, thank you very much. If you could say your name and company as well, please.
Yeah, it's Roland Niklaus, Lambda Helix Data Centers from Greece. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your customer drivers and customer centricity? In particular, I guess Switzerland, from my experience, is probably maybe not a very public cloud-friendly market. How do you compare that to other markets where you probably have much more, public cloud openness? And how do you position your business plans going forward, and also the organization around these drivers from a customer point of view?
So I think in terms of, I assume that's for me. I think that in terms of cloud adoption, we are catching up rapidly. The hyperscalers, the cloud providers were late coming in. to Switzerland, which was sort of to our benefit. We were able to sort of build around that before they arrived. What we see from them is the adoption is increasing. We see instances which are in the media where UBS and the Swiss training authorities and everybody is starting to adopt cloud. I think it's something that will catch on, certainly over the next couple of years in a far greater manner. We don't have. I don't think Amazon have deployed yet. We have Google, we have Microsoft, Azure, and there's Oracle and Zurich. So we're pretty much. I think we're pretty much there. So a couple more years.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Yes, at the back. Make Ivan work hard.
Hello, good morning. My name is Gerd Simon, independent management consultant out of Germany, and having my history as a co-founder of Interaction in the very old days in Germany. The big question nowadays that's in my mind is how important is for you to get really green power, really true green power and carbon neutral setups in your business? How important is that for convincing your customers to come to your place? To have this leadership implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to?
Well, I agree. I think it's really important. So, and of course, we are fortunate in Norway. We have 99.5% hydroelectric power, renewable, without we're not pumping it up again or something like that. And the wind power is expanding very, very quickly, both in Denmark and Sweden and so on. And I think that's crucial for us to kind of be able to show that, yes, this power, and it will not be enough just to have a green certificate from the power agency. You will have to show that, well, that cable came from green power. But of course, it's if kind of the worst forecasts say that we will use 20% of the world's power in like 5 to 10 years, it will be scrutinized, and there will be questions of why should we use the power for the data center industry instead of something else. Even though, and if we use all the hydroelectric power in Norway, then it won't be able to power anything else. So the need for kind of also looking into being more efficient and using the energy again is really crucial.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think we've certainly, I've not heard that 15-20%. I know certain countries like Ireland have that issue, but I think it's fascinating that we see a lot of the hyperscalers say 100% green power, great. But of course, as you say, if they're merely taking it from someone else, or of course it's been imported into the country, how green is it really? So, I mean, I don't know, Prashant, maybe from your side, I mean, were people really examining the green credentials, or were they taking some of this on face value?
But I think, the customers that we speak to are actually quite well educated, quite well understanding of sort of the local market constraints, and a lot of the Asia Pacific markets where green investment, sustainable power investment is a big topic. But it's still very much in sort of investment phase, and sort of, in especially large geographies like Australia, actually access is quite difficult to actually get. While there's a lot of solar, it's sort of in the middle of the country. So getting access to that all the way back into major cities has probably been the biggest issue. But look, we going back to the question, we definitely see it's a topic of major question from our end customers, and why we've been investing into things like embedded energy networks to make sure that the provision of that power ultimately is the customer's decision. They are very much focused on it, and we're just making sure we can enable that to the best possible standards we can. Ultimately, the grid that we're in Australia is still very much coal-fired. So it is not a clean energy market in the Australian market, but increasingly more wind, increasingly more solar is finding its way into the grid. Getting access direct to cables, I think, will be difficult in at least the near term. Like that will be a complete infrastructure reshift in that market. But these are some of the challenges that are very sort of centric to the markets we operate in. But I think at the end of the day, our customers ultimately understand, the limitations, what we can do. Getting access to PPAs with green, using embedded energy to ultimately get that, green certification is probably where we see the market going very, very quickly from here.
Absolutely. And Frederic, from your side, I mean, for some of your customers, if you say you can have green power, but it costs a little bit more, I mean, how willing are they to pay that?
Well, the cost differential has really decreased. We see here, we also benefit. We have large mountains, lots of water, hydroelectric power, and so we benefit from that. And our data centers are rigged to give the heat back to communities. But what we will see, and we saw the EU say something this week, is that we need to be carbon neutral. And I think they've set a date of 2030. So Switzerland is, usually follows behind. We're not part of the EU, but we do follow their regulations. Welcome, by the way. So yeah, we are. We are non-EU, but we do follow a lot of what the EU has to say on in terms of sort of sustainability and regulations around the environment.
And thank you, Frederic, for bringing up the B word.
I didn't.
Nearly. You've done very well. Okay, we're running out of time, but very happy to take one more question if anyone has it. Anything anyone's dying to ask before we go for the networking break? No? Okay, well, with that, I'd very much like to thank the panellists for the time this morning. Thank you.